Hey guys, Dan Murray here, and welcome to this episode of the podcast. In a moment, I'll be introducing you to Laura Roeder. Laura has built multiple SaaS software companies. She's currently the founder and CEO of Paperbell, but we're actually going to talk about the company before that called Meet Edgar. But Laura is a real fireball. She was named top 100 entrepreneurs under 30 in 2011, 13, and 14, and even spoke on entrepreneurship at the White House. I always enjoy chatting to Laura, and she's agreed to come on today to speak about her exit journey and how that came about and the lessons learned along the way. So with that said, welcome, Laura.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, well, thank you for being here. So, let's talk about Meet Edgar. So, take us back to the early days. Well, actually, first of all, what does Meet Edgar do? What
Mhm.
did it do when you started the business? What was the intent behind the company?
Yeah, so Meet Edgar is a social media scheduling tool in the same space as Buffer or Hootsuite, tools people might be familiar with. When we launched in 2014, we had kind of a new idea on how to do social media, which was to put everything basically in a bucket and then let the software keep repurposing it. I'll speak about Meet Edgar sometimes in the past tense because I'm not working on it anymore, but it does still exist. I still use it for my current company. I still don't understand why not everyone does this with social media, by the way, like instead of coming up with something new every time. So that was kind of the big idea when we launched Meet Edgar.
I love it. And what did those first 6 to 12 months look like? What were the kind of the biggest early mistakes or challenges?
Yeah, well, we had actually big success really early, which is very unusual. So, we were a kind of bootstrap, self-funded company. We did have some money from the previous business to put into it, maybe 100K or 200K, something like that. And we were at a million annual reoccurring revenue USD. It was an American company within 11 months of launching. I think, in retrospect, I think it was kind of a right place, right time. A lot of people were organic social media was really big then. A lot of people were looking for an organic tool to use. So we certainly made plenty of mistakes, but we also experienced some really fast growth and success.
Yeah, interesting, especially with how the landscape's changing. And at what point did you feel like the business was going to become something special? Did it feel, you said about the right place, right time? Was it everything felt easy, or was it just that you felt that you were the particular routes of marketing? At what point did you kind of go, wow, this thing could really fly? Or did you always think it was going to be big?
No, it did better than I thought it would. So at the time, before Edgar, I was running a social media course business, teaching small businesses how to do social media marketing. So I thought Edgar was really an experiment. I thought, okay, let's try to make software. The course business is going well. It was a pretty successful business. I'm like, maybe we can have the software as kind of an upsell to the course or something like that. I really didn't know how it was going to go, but basically, we saw that people wanted to buy it right away. I mean, we had an existing list to launch to, which is certainly a huge factor in the early success, right? We weren't starting from zero. We already had a business of people that
Right.
wanted to learn about social media marketing. So we sold them Edgar. But I think kind of when I talk to people now about this whole idea of like product market fit, how do you know if people want it? If people are trying to buy it, they want it, And in some businesses, it's just really obvious right away. It's like, yeah, people actually really want to buy this thing and are buying this thing. So, I mean, really right from the launch, we were like, oh wow, this is doing better than we thought it would.
Fascinating. So you obviously got to 1 million AR in the first 11 months, I think you said. And then talk to us about the growth, because obviously it grew significantly beyond that before the exit.
hmm hmm
What were the two questions, either order? What were the kind of key inflection points in scaling the business? Was it a strategic shift, new hire, or how did the business model evolve over time?
Yeah, so we got the business to the low to mid seven figures. It had its ups and downs over the years. Some years the revenue went up, some years the revenue went down, some years the revenue was flat, which I always want to say that because I think especially when you have an early success, I just thought it would go up forever. I really did. I was like, oh, look at this. We're gonna double every year. And I think if you've only had that kind of business, or if you're maybe really early in your business, I think we hear so many success stories on this types of podcasts that it sounds silly, but it's like, yeah, businesses do go down. I wish I was more aware of that. So yeah, we had a lot of ups and downs, and we focused a lot on building out the team. So we were a very early remote, fully remote company. So yeah, we launched in 2014. At the time, everyone was in the US where the company was based, but everyone worked from home. We kind of all worked live together on Slack online. And back then, there were not as many remote jobs. So recruiting for a great professional full time job at a serious company, but being able to do that fully remote was a great point for us in being able to get talent because, we're a software company. So we were competing against Silicon Valley and they were paying, sometimes literally four times the salary for an engineer that we were. So we were really able to use that to our advantage.
Interesting. And where you said it's an American company, and obviously you are an American, but you live in the UK now. How did that factor in, or what point did you make the leap across the pond?
Yeah, so I moved to Brighton, where I live now, in 20 I always have to do it by the years my kids were born. 2018, yeah. 2018 would have been when I moved to the UK. And it actually was a problem in the company. So as I mentioned, we were remote, but it wasn't like we had people in Asia, we had people in Europe, everyone was in the US. We did a lot of live meetings and stuff. By the time I moved, I was largely out of the day-to-day. We had a general manager who was running the company, but I still at minimum talked to her every week, was still involved in the company. And it actually was a huge challenge moving here because she was on the West Coast. So I'm sure some listeners have dealt with this, most of the year, 9 a.m. West Coast is 5 p.m. UK time. And I have little kids, that's not a working time for me. That's dinner time, bath time, all that stuff. So that actually was part of the impetus to make some changes to the business, and not why we sold the business at the end of the day, but kind of, I think, started that, I don't know, ball rolling down that hill that led to starting the business.
Yeah, so talk me through the thought process, because it was about that time I think that we met, and I think when
Hmm.
we first met, as I recall, in the boardroom, you hadn't decided to sell. You were
Right.
kind of weighing things up because the business was low, multi seven-figure revenue, but
Hmm.
very profitable, and
Well,
most people would give their arm and a leg for a business like this because it's a recurring revenue model, and you were, as I remember, kind of on the fence, or undecided about what
yeah.
to do. So what take us back to that time. What was your kind of thought process? What were you thinking through, and what caused you to reach the conclusion it was time to sell?
Yeah, so that was definitely something I spent a lot of time on in my work with you and I think that's actually part of the reason I decided to join the boardroom was that I knew I was facing this big decision of keep or sell, and I wanted some outside input about it. So for me, I had this business that was super profitable, a real cash machine. It didn't take, so I work with my husband as my co-founder, and it didn't take a lot of our time because we had other people in place and we had things very automated and hands off. But, I think what a lot of entrepreneurs realize is the better the business is for you, the better it is to sell, right? That's kind of the positive irony in all this. The more you want to hold on to it, hopefully that's because someone else would find it really valuable as well. And at the time I was coming to this decision point, we had already started Paperbell, the business that I'm running now. That was going well, although not as we didn't hit a million in the first year, I'll tell you that much. So it was going well, but not as well as Edgar. So yeah, I was kind of facing this like, okay, do I keep the business? And by that time, something that we had decided to do was to try putting the business in a kind of maintenance mode where we weren't actively growing the business. We let go of basically all the team and moved to a freelance team. And that was kind of the first path that I decided to go down. I'm like, okay, this will be kind of a win-win where the business will just exist, but we won't be actively growing it. It'll still be throwing off cash. But I didn't do that I think it ended up being a few months of doing that. And that's actually gave me clarity to say, actually, I'm not loving it. It just felt kind of dead, It's like
Right.
part of the fun of running a business is growing it and the excitement of all the growth and changes. And I remember that something you showed me that I use all the time now is just doing a decision matrix. Is that what you call it?
Yeah, I think it's the options analysis matrix. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So just that was really helpful for me. So I just did different columns of if I keep it, it'll look like this. If I sell it for this amount, it'll look like this. If I sell it for that amount, it'll look like this. And just factoring in the money, my own time, my own enjoyment of the business. That also I found doing that exercise brought out a lot of details I hadn't considered. One of the big details was taxes. Selling a business is often a very different tax situation as far as how, the money comes in than keeping the business. Of course, in the UK, we have entrepreneurs relief and all that stuff. So it just brought out some of those details that I hadn't really. I think it's easy to let things sort of spin around in your head and you kind of have the same, you don't realize until someone else gives you the perspective that you're just spinning around the same thought kind of
Right.
over and over again. So I found it hugely helpful to have that outside perspective and not just circling the same thoughts, but some new thoughts, some new things to consider.
And let's talk about the how the exit came out itself. I mean, I remember shortly after you get exited, you gave a talk which is now gone down as legendary in our CEO mastermind, where you spoke about the journey. Because I think, well, in many respects, yours was. I've never seen. I've seen a couple be faster, but it was very fast and it was very
Very fast.
simple.
Hmm.
There was and yet when you started, well, it wouldn't be true. So you didn't have experience. That wouldn't be true. But it was, you kind of were like, okay, I'm going to sell this business. What now?
Well, I had never done that before. It's definitely accurate to say I had no experience. I had a business that my partner bought me out of before, was kind of the closest thing, but that was that was totally different than taking a business out to market. So, yes, it would be accurate to say I had no experience selling a business.
Oh, I was being polite. Okay, so tell us what you did. Tell us what you did. As in, how did you find a buyer? Because you've got this software company that's profitable that that somebody would want. What was the journey like for you? Because I think some people are listening to this and maybe they've got a business that's reached maturity and they're kind of going,
Mhm.
okay, I've lost interest in this business. Because by the way, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you'd already started Paperbell. And it
Right.
felt like, I mean, you said it was dead when you let it hands off. Because is it fair to say that your interest or your passion or your kind of heart had shifted to working on this new project?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So how did you then go about finding a potential buyer?
Yeah. So the first thing I did was just to do a lot of research. And that was before AI, by the way. So it would be even
Right,
easier now. But
right.
I think this is important to bring up because I think a lot of people skip this part and they shouldn't. So when I was first like, okay, I think I'm going to do this, I'm going to sell this business, I just read all the books I could find about selling your business. And honestly, there's not very many. Really, I always tell people now, John Warrow's The Art of Selling Your Business. If you just read that one, you're good. And so now whenever anyone asks me about selling a business, I'm like, I will take no questions until you read that book. Read the whole thing, listen to it, whatever you like to do. So I read all the books I could find about selling a business. You've done some podcast interviews on your podcast, detail about exits. I just listen to a lot of things like that. And I find that doing the research, it doesn't take a year and you start to get a really good, this goes for anything, right? Like if you're like, I've never done enterprise sales before and I want to learn how to do that. If you read 6 books and listen to 20 podcasts about it, like you're pretty golden,
Right.
You still haven't done it before, which is certainly important, but you understand the lay of the land, you understand the terms, you understand the different things that might happen. So that's where I started, was just learning as much as I could. And after that, I made the controversial decision to run my own process for selling the business. So I didn't work with a broker. I worked with you as an advisor, kind of coaching me along and giving me feedback on what was going on. I had a lawyer that did a bit of that as well, but I didn't have that, broker or banker who was running the process. I did run the process myself.
And what was your motive? Why? Obviously, you'd educate yourself, which is wise for anybody, whether
Mhm.
you can be more hands on or more hands off in the process. What was your reason for wanting to run the process yourself? And would you do it differently?
Yeah, yeah, good question. So I had a few reasons. One is that I wanted to, which is a big one. I was talking actually to someone yesterday who's looking at selling his business, and he said, I just don't want to touch the negotiation. I don't feel confident about it at all. And I was like, then don't do it, right? If you think you're going to be bad at it, then I would advise not to do it. For me, it was something I was excited about, that I wanted to do, something that I wanted to try. So, that was point one, is that I wanted to. Point two is that I'm just going to be really real. I could not find a broker that anyone said, yes, I absolutely loved them. I had an amazing experience. There's a lot of negative stories out there, unfortunately. Obviously, there's good ones, and there are. I'm thinking of one in particular, good one, but he does bigger deals
Right.
than mine was. And maybe that's part of it, is that it is kind of hard to find at this lower end of the market. And I also felt like, it's kind of the estate agent problem, where estate agents say that they're motivated to get the best price, but really what's best for an estate agent is to close the deal. And I think selling your business at the end of the day is kind of the same thing. The best thing for a broker is to get any buyer, because most businesses ultimately don't end up selling when they go through this process. So I just felt like I would be more motivated to get the best price that I could.
So how did you reach out to buyers? So you did some research, and you decided that the best buyer was not a trade buyer from memory, but private equity.
Right.
How? I'm the leading question just because it always makes
Yeah.
me smile when you tell people how you did this. Okay, I want to buy private equity. All these people with all these big pots of money, which is true.
Yep.
Private equity is just getting a larger and larger share of the business transactions are purchased by
Mhm.
equity. But how did you find your buyer, Laura?
Email them. Yeah, I just sent cold emails. So this is another thing that I think people really overthink. It's like, if you have a valuable company that people would want to buy, who really wants to hear from you is the people that buy those companies. And also, you mentioned I had a fast process, so that was part of this whole thing. I had what's sometimes called a financial acquisition instead of a strategic acquisition. So that means I sold to a small private equity. They bought the business for financial reasons, meaning it was a strong business, not for strategic, meaning they were going to fold it into an existing business. Strategic sales very often have the founder do like a 2-3 year earnout. They're selling to a big corporate company where they're working a job at that company. They're often longer. I'm speaking in generalities. It's not, always this way, but in general, the whole thing takes longer, and it's just a bit harder to approach them because you just don't know. Like a company like HubSpot acquires a good amount of businesses, but you have no idea if they're looking for sometimes they're looking for agencies, sometimes they're looking for a certain type of tech. You don't know what their M&A team is looking for. Whereas who I approached were small private equity who buys software companies of my size. And that's why people think it sounds funny when I'm like, I just cold emailed them, but they want to hear from me. They are looking to buy software companies. I have a software company to sell. So like, yeah, they're welcoming my cold email.
So you message them, yeah, profound strategy. Find somebody that wants
Yeah.
what I've got and offer it to them. How is the valuation done? To whatever degree you're obviously there's business, so there's contractual commitments, but to whatever degree you're comfortable, Edgar is multi 7-figure revenue. But
Mhm.
how is the company valued? Can you speak to that in terms of multiples, in terms of and how far apart were you or not
Yeah.
with what you wanted and what they wanted, and did the price shift over the negotiation process?
Yeah. So I can share that I sold the business for 7 figures. So that tells you it was somewhere between, 1 million and 10 million. And as far as the multiple, SaaS is usually multipled on top line revenue, which is quite different from other businesses. Although some people say this is changing in SaaS now in 2025. I'm not sure. But SaaS is often a top line revenue multiple as opposed to a profit multiple.
When you talk about revenue, you mean ARR, right? Because
ARR, annual recurring revenue. Yeah, yeah. And so the thing is, though, the way I thought of it, because often this is kind of a little negotiation tip, like, when you're in this process, people will say, okay, we've put a valuation of, 5 times profit or 2 times ARR or whatever. The way I would kind of talk to them about it, it's like, I have a number I'm looking to hit. It doesn't really, I'm not going to argue with you about like, it doesn't matter to me what your internal process is, whether you valued it at profit or annual revenue, or if you valued last 3 years or whatever. I think sometimes people get a bit stuck in the weeds of that, of being like, oh, well, you did a trailing 2 year, but you should have done trailing 3 year. It's like you both just have to agree to a number at the end of the day. And it doesn't really matter how they got to that number. But yes, the first offer that I got from the company I ended up selling to was much lower than where we ended up. Maybe I was trying to remember, maybe about like 60% of it.
that's my memory. My memory was it was about
Mhm.
2/3, which is funny because I don't mind admitting when I'm wrong. I remember, Laura, when we had a conversation in the boardroom about what do you want or how much is it worth, and you said a number. And I don't know if I said this externally to you or whether I thought it internally to myself, but I remember kind of going, no, that's aggressive. That's like that's going to be a tough call. And yet you ended up selling for more than that number,
Mm,
right? Which shows me
yeah.
that yeah, the industry and the buyer is important and what they're looking for, right? So how did you get if you were at 60% or 2/3 and you went up, whatever that means, what caused the shift? What caused them to shift by such a significant margin?
Yeah, I mean, so I did have multiple buyers in the running and I leveraged that a lot. So that's one of the biggest pieces of advice that John Warlow gives in the art of selling your business. And I think this is really important advice because people often come about selling their business because they get approached. So they might have a strategic or someone or a partner or a client say, "Hey, we're interested in buying your business." They start going down that path. That's great. That's fine. That's a great way to kick it off. But I do think it's a mistake once you've started that process not to look at anyone else. I think sometimes people are just sort of intimidated by the process or they don't think anyone else is going to want to buy it. But if a company is serious about buying you, the odds are extremely good that another company would also be serious about it,
Right.
right? If
Yeah. I mean, I don't think people look at this enough because they compare it to houses, right? I
Mhm,
think, 'cause they go, oh, there's a load of comparables, and therefore the range for which your house might sell, it might sell for a premium because somebody really wants a specific location, but that premium is going to be capped, so maybe like 10 or 15% above kind of
mhm,
the market standard rate. But for companies, I mean, I don't believe I got this from John, I got this from somewhere else, but they call it the rule of 2.5 for those listening, which is if you got multiple buys, say if you got 5 bids, the high price will be 2.5 times the low price. Right. So, and that would just never happen in property. You
mhm,
wouldn't get
mm,
a house on the market that's worth 1.5 million and you get a low bid at 1 million. You might get that, I suppose, a very cheeky low ball if you're desperate, but you wouldn't
right.
get simultaneously get somebody offering 2.5 million. In fact, Laura, there's somebody due to come on the podcast in the next week or so that put a company for sale at 14 million, then was persuaded to go out to market and he got another offer at 27 million and another one at 31 million.
Wow. Yeah.
And he got out at, which kind of perfectly proves that rule of 2.5. And he actually in the end chose the 27 million because there were less terms attached to it, the
Mm,
31 million. So talking of which, how was the deal structured? Because a lot of people have very complicated structures and deferred and contingent
right.
vendor finance. And I know yours was a lot more straightforward than that. How was the
Yes.
deal composed?
Mine was the entrepreneur's dream, which a lot of people say is not realistic. And, for context, this was in I think 2021 is when we sold the business. So it was still zero interest rate, type of world. Things are not exactly the same now, but I did have an excellent terms. So I got, I think it was 80% cash on closing and then the final 20% 6 months later. And that wasn't, it was just a little hold. It wasn't based on any performance or anything like that. I told them I could advise, but I didn't have any time working in the business. So it was the dream. It is possible, or at least it was in 2021. I can't say for sure that it is now, but I think it's important to bring up. But you might, it depends on the industry a lot. Obviously, if your business is kind of one where you're doing the sales, you're the thought leader, it's probably not going to happen without some kind of earnout of you and the company. And again, this goes to the financial versus strategic. I knew what I wanted. So I was willing to take a lower number from that kind of financial buyer, as opposed to it's possible I could have gotten a higher strategic acquisition where I would have stayed in the company and had the earnout and all that.
Right, right, and then so as I remember, you actually got because you got the full 20%. So a lot of people have fears. So the whole was to make sure
Yeah.
that everything was as expected. The process,
Mm,
so it was more of um uh, uh, a holding deposit, or it was in escrow effectively, just to make sure that everything was as you reported it.
exactly.
And you got the balance 6 months later. So what was it like? That's why. What was the moment like? Even though you've been bought out by a business partner, what was it like when this 7-figure number, a cash number
Mm.
hit your bank account? How did you and Chris celebrate? Was it euphoric? Was it depressing? What was the emotional journey like when the money hit the bank?
Yeah, so the celebration was not very exciting. We had little kids at the time, so we couldn't be like, "We're going to Paris for a week." I think we like went to Brighton Beach and had a beer that night or something, like when it actually landed. The most exciting part, honestly, was the negotiation.
Hmm.
That was more exciting for me than the money landing. I think, I've listened to a lot of interviews of people's exits, and I think this is really common as like by the time the money actually lands, you've spent so much time in the process. So that often doesn't feel like the high, that just feels like the end. Or sometimes if the process has been really horrible, it's just like, oh, thank God it's finally over, more of just like a relief than a celebration. So, don't get me wrong, it's been amazing. It was definitely life-changing type of money for me. But yeah, I would say like that getting the numbers up in the negotiation, that was the really exciting part.
Right, right. Well, and obviously, I know you're now doing next with Paper Bell, but I also think you, I mean, maybe you would have done it anyway. But the thing that I know a lot of our members are inspired by you is that you took your kids and you traveled a lot, traveled the world. So what's life now like post exit, and how did you balance, I suppose, enjoying your children, the travel, but also clearly there's a entrepreneurial driving you, hence why you're going again.
Yeah, yeah. So I had overlap, as we mentioned. So I had already started Paper Bell by the time we sold Edgar, but we did take 6 months to travel full time with the kids while running Paper Bell at the same time. The way we've designed our business is super flexible and doesn't need a ton of hours from my husband and myself. So yeah, I mean, having that financial freedom has definitely been huge. It's allowed me to experiment with the business I'm doing now a lot more because, we are pretty set from the exit we had before. So I've been able to do it more as something that I enjoy doing and have a lot of freedom and creativity in how I structure Paper Bell. So yeah, I love talking about the exit because I think it's for me, it fundamentally shifted my mindset as an entrepreneur. And this happened for me when I did the exit to the partner because I got this huge check for getting rid of something.
Yeah.
I was like, wait, what? I said, what? So I don't have to work on this anymore. And I'm getting a massive check for doing that. That is very, very interesting. So I think it is a really cool milestone to have on the journey of being an entrepreneur. If it's something that interests you, I would really encourage people to go for it because I think often we're trying to build towards this mindset of being an owner, being a shareholder, a lot of the concepts that you talk about. I think once you sell, you really get it in this really deep way where you're like, "Oh, I actually built something that has this huge value when I get rid of it, when someone else takes it on." So that's just been an incredibly valuable mindset shift for me and how I've always run businesses since.
I love it. Well, final two questions. So, firstly, for someone who's listening in the trenches, that's kind of like up to their eyeballs in it, and of course, some people are feeling the pinch right now, and the business is really
Mm,
squeezed. And I'm glad that earlier you mentioned some of the ups and downs with
mm.
the Edgar revenue. What would you say to them?
It's really hard, but you have to take a step back, I think, and make sure that you have a foundational financial model that really works. So some businesses that are struggling, they just don't have a financial model that will ever work. It's like things are hard now, even if things go well, you're still only taking home 5K profit or whatever it is, right? And so you really think, something that I really like about working with you is you're very, very numbers oriented, which I find a lot of business coaching and advising is not numbers oriented. And I think that's just the most important thing at the end of the day. This has to be a business that can make the numbers work. And if the numbers aren't working now, there has to be a realistic future where you're seeing a financial model that does work, not just like, oh, I hope it doubles. It's like, okay, well, what is it even possible for it to double the location and the model that you have now? Like looking at all those details, I mean, that's kind of my biggest piece of advice. And if an exit is something that does sound appealing to you, why not work towards that? Right? It's like anyone who runs a business, it's all hard. Whatever direction you go in is hard to achieve. So might as well try to build a business that you will be able to sell.
Right, right, right. If you're going to have hard, you might as well get paid at the end of it to get rid of
Yes.
it, rather than pay to get rid of it. I've loved this conversation, Laura. For anybody it's always good to see you, but for somebody that's listening to this that wants to find out about you or meet Edgar or Paper Bell, what's the best way to get in touch?
Yeah. So if you happen to be in the coaching industry, check out Paperbell at paperbell.com. I sometimes write blog posts at lauraroeder.com. You can Google it and spell it wrong and you'll find it.
Good, good. Very good. Well, Laura, it's been a pleasure. Always wonderful to see you, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you.